Call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I say. As for everyone who comes to me and hears my words and puts them into practice, I will show you what they are like. They are like a man building a house who dug down deep and laid the foundation on a rock. When a flood came, the torrent struck that house, but could not shake it, because it was well built. But the one who hears my words and does not put them into practice is like a man who built a house on the ground without a foundation. The moment the torrent struck the house, it collapsed and its destruction was complete.
1 Corinthians chapter 3, 10-15. By the grace God has given me, I laid a foundation as a as a wise builder, and someone else is building on it. But each one should build with care, for no one can lay any foundation on other than the one already laid, which is Jesus Christ. If anyone builds on this foundation, using gold, silver, constantly, stones, wood, hay, or straws, their work will be shown for what it is, because the day will bring it to light. It will be revealed with fire, and the fire will test the quality of each person's work. If what has been said survives, the builders will receive a reward. If it is burned up, the builder will suffer loss, but yet will be saved, even though only as one escaping through the flames.
So just some quick thoughts from me this morning. And I'm going to focus on Jesus' story, although Paul tends to agree with what Jesus says, in that our lives are to be built on a good foundation. And in Paul's language, that foundation is Jesus Christ himself. The first thing, we'll go with 3 words this morning: hearing, doing, and trusting. Jesus says to the crowds, listen, why are you calling me Lord, Lord, and you're not doing what I say? Everyone who comes to me and hears my word and puts them into practice, I will show you what they are like. Jesus says it's the people that hear his words and do them and trust him that are wise. We are to be a people who hear the words of Jesus. Now, we're looking at Luke's gospel here, but Matthew's take is that Jesus says, whoever hears these words of mine. That's what Jesus says in Matthew around the Sermon of the Mount. And I'm always wanting to emphasize that Jesus isn't talking about whoever hears the articulation of faith according to this denomination or that. He says, no, these words that I have spoken right now to you are the words you are to put into practice. So as a church, as Christians, we have to learn the art of discerning the mind and Christ and heart of Jesus Christ in and through his words. So we're called to listen. We're called to listen to the words of Jesus. But then we're also called to do what he says. And to make this really simple, Jesus has already told us in the last few weeks the words that he's used about loving enemies, about blessings and woes, about not judging, about the way that we conduct ourselves and the fruit that we bear. Jesus' way is really quite simple, and I'm sure that's why it gets sidestepped, because it's much more difficult than being able to say, I've signed a piece of paper with a load of doctrine on it. Because if we're really going to put Jesus' words into practice, that means we have to be a reflective community. We can't just get away with rhetoric against people if we're followers of Jesus, because Jesus clearly says, love your enemies. That's one of the things he says, I want you to do now. If you've heard this, do it. I don't want you to judge. I don't want you to be anxious. I don't want this. I don't want that. I don't want you to be reciprocating the anger and bitterness and mentality of the world to the world because you're hurt. I want you to have a different way. I want you to be merciful as your Father in heaven is merciful. So we're called to hear. to listen, to be humble, to understand that maybe we need to hear the words of Jesus because all the other words that we hear tend to make us more egotistical, perhaps arrogant, and even certain in the wrong sense of the word. So we're to be humble enough to sit and listen, to really quieten ourselves to hear. But then we must be doers of Jesus' words. We can't just get away with a mental assent to who Jesus is without taking what he teaches seriously as a pattern for our own lives. It just doesn't make sense, does it? You know, if we say, Lord, Lord, about Jesus, and then we don't put his words into practice, it's hypocritical nonsense, really, isn't it? So we're to be doers of the word. Now, when Jesus talks about these two builders, the one builder who is wise, he says he builds on a good foundation, on the rock, on something solid. When the floods and the torrents came, it couldn't be shaken because it was well built. We're called to hear the words of Jesus. We are empowered by the Spirit to do and put into practice the way of Jesus. But we're also called to trust. To trust that these words don't fall by the wayside. Jesus is really saying to us, if we are serious about emptying our lives from arrogance and ego to follow a different way, we have a foundation that will stand the test of time. So we are to trust. I think trust is such a difficult concept. To trust, to hope, to almost think that there is a word of promise given that we might not be seeing it come to pass, but we trust that the one who gives it is able to lead us forward in spite of the torrents that might strike our lives and the floods that inevitably come. We trust in Jesus Christ. We trust his words. But we can be foolish. I was thinking when I watched that little clip up there, and you had the wise man who builds his house on the rock. And most of you will see houses being thrown up left, right, and centre at some point in your life. It is a slow process to get the foundations correct. It's slow. It calls for patience to build our lives on the teachings of Jesus. And so the first man in that video builds his house. The second man is chilling on the beach with, I don't know, he's got a cocktail in his hand. It's a bit showy, isn't it? You know, one of the things I think that is a danger to our lives is shortcuts, especially in the Christian life. If we can grab hold of an equation or a strategy that guarantees church growth in a week, most people will take it. But when the wind and the waves come with that kind of stuff, there's never a solid foundation. Sometimes we can be impatient. We want everything right away. We want everything to be instant. But instant stuff often doesn't last. Perhaps sometimes we want the instant stuff because we can show off that we're not having to be boring and patient and wait around. We've got everything sorted so quickly. We waved some kind of magic wand and everything came to pass. Isn't it great? The way of Jesus is a way of long and steady obedience. It is a life work following Jesus. And yes, there are moments on the journey where it seems as if God comes in and does something dramatic, but it is a journey nevertheless. And Paul reminds us, doesn't he, in the second reading, that no one can lay any foundation other than the one that's already laid, which is Jesus Christ. So this morning, when you think about your life, I think about mine, and we think about our life together, it is essential that we're a community in which we hear and value the words of Jesus himself. I haven't got an issue with the articulations of who Jesus is that come later, but we can often miss the teachings of Jesus. And often miss them. You read any of the classic creeds which articulate for us the person of Jesus, you wouldn't think Jesus had an earthly life or taught anything, because it's not included in any of the creeds. We've got one issue we need to define and sort, which needed to happen in the early church period, but it's almost as if the emphasis on that kind of stuff washed away everything that Jesus really stands for. So let's be a community that really focuses in on it and hears the words of Jesus. But let's go further than that too. And let's press ourselves to put in place, to practice, to flesh out what Jesus was all about. Jesus really, for me, the more that I read the Gospels, is much more about what you do now matters. What you do now really, really matters. Don't think about reward this way. What you do now matters. How you build is a matter of great importance. But let's assure ourselves too this morning that as we hear and as we do, we can trust too in the promises of God, that if we build this way, we will be sustained. As we embrace a way of patient and steady obedience, we will be sustained. As we build on Christ alone, our work, when tested with fire, will receive a great reward. Maybe this morning we need to renew our sense of putting Christ at the centre of who we are as people and as Hayward Baptist Church folk. We choose to trust the promise of Christ and to work towards the hope that he has given us in this world. Amen.
Oh, they suffer, to the graceless scandal of the cross, I'm ashamed to tell your story, to counters earthly pains lost, to know you and your glory. How long, Lord, till you come? How long till the earth is filled with your song? How long until your justice shines like the sun? How long, Lord, till